Hello, everybody. I see that we're getting a good number of participants now, and it's 2 o'clock, so time to get the meeting started. Do people hear me properly? Okay. My name is Eefke Smit from the FTM Publishers Association, and I'm happy to be your moderator for this webinar today. And we have a very good topic, I think. It is the virtual centers of excellence. And as we all know, for APARSEN, that is an important topic because that is what we try to create during the APARSEN project. And today we've invited several people who already work with virtual centers of excellence or who have had a head start and have their first experiences. And we like to learn from them what APARSEN should or should not do, the do's and don'ts, and best practice recommendations. We have 4 speakers to cover this. After Simon does a general introduction on APARSEN as such, we have Adam Farquhar from the British Library, Hildelies Balk of the Royal Library in the Netherlands. We had Daniel Platings, who was going to tell us something about the Virtual Center of Excellence for Museums, but he just had a small car accident that left him unharmed, but made it very inconvenient for him to come and speak. So we'll keep him in reserve for next time. And I expect David Arnold to come and join us from the VCT 3D consortium. Yeah, David is here, I see the list, but not as one of the speakers with the camera on. David, if you can hear us, I recommend, I seem to be insufficient bandwidth on the wireless here. Okay, that could be the case. Perhaps we can try though, if your voice works. Can you click on the microphone that at least we can check we can hear you? David, you tried to speak? Well, let's hope that while we start with the other presentations, and when Simon is sharing his screen, he will point at where the microphone button is for all the next speakers, and at least I'm sure that the one of Adam works because we tested it, and Hildenise has done this before, so for the next half hour or so we should.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Hildenise, we hear you. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I
must ask everybody
camera to work, but it won't work. But anyway.
Simon will share his screen and just check.
Well, thanks anyway. I also wanted to say to everybody, this mega meeting tool only works if 1 or 2 people maximum have the microphone on. So I shall duly close my microphone each time, and I would like to ask everybody to do the same after having said what you wanted to say. So I suggest, oh no, there are 2 more household things I want to say. The whole meeting is recorded, so keep that in mind. Speaking. And we also will have a written report which is done by Kian, who I saw has already joined the meeting. So I guess that means that we're all ready to go. And I would like to invite Simon to start with the general introduction. Simon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eefke. Yes, I'm going to give a short introduction to the APARSEN network and why we're holding this webinar on the subject of virtual centres of excellence. I shall be showing the slides using a facility of Mega Meeting called Share My Screen, which we've tested and it works well. I'll also be showing the slides for the other speakers, so you'll need to indicate when you'd like me to advance to the next slide. If you could keep that in mind, please. So now I'm going to try and share my screen, or rather my PowerPoint. Okay, so now you should be able to see a nice PowerPoint cover slide with the APARSEN logo and my name, etc. Can everyone see that? Bear in mind that I can't see the chat window anymore, so all I can see is my own slot. So you'll have to, if someone could just say yes, that's fine.
Looks good to me, Simon.
Yeah. Good. Great. I shall. Thanks. Okay, so first of all, I mean, I know there are many APARSEN partners on the webinar today, but not everyone is involved in APARSEN, so a very quick introduction. It's a network of excellence in digital preservation, funded by the European Commission under its 7th framework programme. We're almost approaching the halfway point now. It's 4 years duration, started in January 2011, and my own organisation, STFC, in the UK, is the coordinating body. Now, a network of excellence, as many of you will know, is all about bringing together a critical mass of expertise in a particular area to coordinate the efforts and to defragment the work that's going on. And so that's what APARSEN is aiming to do for digital preservation. Of course, a critical mass means a lot of partners are required, particularly in such a diverse field as digital preservation. We have 31 altogether. Here are the collection of logos. You can see that there are many different kinds of organisation represented, universities, commercial and industrial companies, research centres, national libraries, bodies which are themselves a consortia of other organisations such as the DPC, the Digital Preservation Coalition, and we have a pretty good coverage of European countries. I realised after producing this map there's actually one missing, which is Israel, I found on the web. Go so far as to include Israel, but that should be there as well in blue. The blue indicates the countries covered, 16 of them altogether, 31 organisations, as I say. But in fact, in practice, we cover far more countries through these membership organisations, such as the Alliance for Permanent Access. So we have a pretty good coverage. What are we trying to do? Well, we're taking a very broad view of digital preservation in terms of application domains, including archives and libraries, scientific data, and other varieties, media, other varieties of digital materials, aspects of the problem and approaches and techniques. Not only technical solutions, but also we're doing, for example, cost modelling and looking at digital rights. So we're trying to cover the whole space of digital preservation, really, with a view to defragmenting the admittedly large amount of research that's been going on already. And one of the key outputs is expected to be this thing called the Virtual Centre of Excellence, which is what today's webinar is all about. This diagram here illustrates the general approach. We have 4 streams of activity running in parallel, so time is from left to right, and the focus changes over time. So in the first year we were concentrating on issues of trust. How do we know that digital materials and repositories are trustworthy over time? In the second year now we're looking at sustainability, and then we'll be looking at usability followed by access. Access meaning how is it possible to ensure that the users of the future can find and interpret the digital materials that they're interested in. So this is the master plan for APARSEN. I won't go into details of work packages and things like that, but that's our own strategy. So the virtual excellence is a key output of the APARSEN network. It's made very clear in the objectives of APARSEN. I quote here, the success of the project will be seen in the subsequent coherence and general direction of travel of research in digital preservation, with an agreed way of evaluating it and the existence of an internationally recognized virtual center of excellence. So this makes it clear that the virtual center of excellence is in some way related to the common vision of research or of the digital preservation landscape. The two go together. The virtual center of excellence has to be related to those things. The plans for APARSEN go on further to make some remarks about the VCOE. Now bear in mind that this was written a couple of years ago, so when it says a virtual center of excellence is a fairly new organizational concept. That was true at the time, but clearly there are examples have developed since then. Its aim is to bring together capabilities, knowledge and expertise from diverse teams to create something exemplary and distinguishable within its domain. And then there's talk about the know-how and the know-why. So the VCOE is seen as a kind of repository of knowledge in this particular area. So that's what we're aiming to build. But of course, the VCOE is not defined by those statements. There are many different forms it could take. And I've listed here some of the most important things that I think we'll need to answer in the lifetime of APARSEN. The first question is that of inside and outside. Who benefits and how do they benefit from the active VCOE? Is it for the benefit of members only, or does it, for example, offer services to people outside the virtual centre? There's a question of sustainability and lifetime. What mechanisms can be put in place to ensure that the VCOE really is sustainable and doesn't just evaporate after a year or two? Scope and activities, if it is going to offer services, what should they be? How broad should they be? Should the virtual centre do research of its own? Should it facilitate research? There are all sorts of questions about what activities it should undertake and support. And then there's the relationship to existing coalitions and networks, of which there are several examples. Some of them indeed are members themselves of APARSEN, as I've mentioned. So there are some important questions there that need to be answered. And this purpose of this webinar is to help us take a step towards answering them, because of course similar things are, and we're going to hear about them, and what we can learn from these activities. I won't go into this at length because Ekta has already summarised the speakers, but we're going to be hearing from three, which should have been four, but only three in fact, virtual centres of excellence or centres of competence, and their experiences, and I look forward very much to hearing what they have to say. After the talks there's going to be an open discussion, and then David Giretta will draw some conclusions about what we've heard. So that's all I had to say in my introduction. I'm now going to briefly stop sharing my desktop while we do the handover, because I'm going to need to bring up the next slides, although in fact I won't, because the next speaker is Adam Farker, who tells me he doesn't have slides. He's a brave man who gives a talk without the crutch of PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. Before we hand over to Adam, I just wanted to check if anybody in the audience has a question for the introduction by Simon. No, I don't hear anybody. So I think we're ready for for Adam. And I think it's not just brave, but also very practical to not bring slides because there's always a bit of complication there. So please go ahead, Adam. The floor is yours.
Okay, so thanks, FT, and I think FT and maybe Hildelise were instrumental in inviting me to come join you, so I'm glad to be able to do that. So I'm Adam Farquhar. I'm head of digital scholarship at the British Library. British Library is actually a member of APARSEN, although mostly you will have been working with Maureen Pennick and Kieran, who's on this call, and others at the British Library rather than myself. So let's see. So I was the coordinator for an FP7 digital conservation project called Planets, which was in one of the previous calls. It ran from 2006 to 2010. And during the course of that project, we also started to think at some point seriously about this sustainability problem, right, and challenge. Actually, we didn't have a notion of a VCOE or something like that articulated in our description of work. That was really an idea, as I'll get to, that formed during the course of the project. So there was a set of partners. We were working really effectively with each other. And I think we felt that we had problems in common whose solutions would require some continued collaboration beyond and outside the scope of the project. And also we had problems and pieces of solutions that applied equally well to a much broader range of organizations than the members of the project. So that was kind of where it came, the sort of motivation came from to develop a kind of center of excellence approach. So what we did during the project, I'll sort of talk a little bit how we got there, was we created a foundation called the Open Planets Foundation. So the OPF, as we often refer to it, is a not-for-profit, membership-supported organization. And I'll just read its mission statement. So the OPF's mission is to ensure that its members around the world are able to meet their digital preservation challenges with a best practice strategy and a solution that is widely adopted and actively practiced by cultural heritage organizations and beyond. So things to highlight there. There's a focus on cultural heritage organizations, but stretching beyond that. Around the world, clearly international from the start, and focused on practical solutions to digital preservation challenges. So the OPF isn't what I'd call a research organization. It's really about that transitioning of ideas from research, from project into products, or techniques or approaches that work in practice at organizations like the British Library, the Austrian National Library, like any of the other members that have large collections of digital content and are worried about providing access to it. Okay, so that's what the Open Planets Foundation is about, and you can see that so there's about engaging and bringing together that expert community, and we've been doing it now for a couple of years, and I think we've made some real progress in that area. And I think also there's some obvious possible synergies between the OPF and the Virtual Center of Excellence that might be the result of the APARSEN work. And not during this conversation particularly, but over the coming year, I hope that we can flesh out some of those possible synergies so we can make sure that, in fact, the work in APARSEN leads to a defragmentation rather than additional fragmentation of that base of research and practice. Okay, so let me roll back now. I think the idea, I think, of the chat was to talk a little bit about how we came to establish the OPF and some of the challenges that we addressed in doing that. And then maybe try to draw out some of the lessons learned there that might be of interest to APARSEN. So that's kind of what I'll hope to do in the next few minutes. So started seriously to think about what to do sort of middle of the project, middle of the Planet project, 2008. We had a couple of workshops. First one was hosted at Microsoft's premises in Brussels, and we were very broad initially. So those first workshops included venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, SMEs, funding agencies. Sylvia Spangler from the NSF was there, members of the project, of course, and we looked at a wide range of options, right? So we said, okay, is this, there's something in here. Is this something that's going to excite a venture capitalist? So while there was some interest amongst the folks representing the venture capitalists, they at the end of the day said, you know what, you guys are not going to meet our quite stringent multiplier requirements on our investment. So I think we had in mind an organization that could grow and be successful, but it wasn't going to be the next Facebook. Okay. We looked at the possibility of a kind of full-on for-profit organization. And I think there's obviously room for for-profit organizations focused on digital preservation. There are tools and services, and we see folks like Tesla, for instance, Libris and others, that are offering products and services, AIT, another example, labeled as digital preservation services. But that didn't fit very well with the project membership that was representing heavily public sector organizations and organizations that are sort of oriented towards open and community-based activities. Okay, so for that reason, we set aside this full-on for-profit approach. We looked at not-for-profit approaches, and we carried that forward, and I'll go on to say a little bit more about that in a moment. We thought about, a non-organizational approach, right? So how would it work if we just had a community? And we actually set that aside. We felt that the community, while active and talented, needed direction and some investment to bring it together. And so that's why we ended up with the approach that we did. We also actually, of course, also considered just folding, right? So there's not, we didn't have an obligation in the project plan of work to establish an organization like the Open Science Foundation. That was an option, and I think actually with every project, one shouldn't feel there's a requirement to create a new legal entity, for instance. That would be a nightmare for the European Commission and for all of us involved in this and other areas. So having decided that we were going to sort of take this not-for-profit, we started by doing quite a bit of background research, and I know you've done some within APARSEN as well, and this is an example of it. So we went and we talked to lots of organizations that had done a kind of similar transition. Some were like RIN, at Bridge Library, Europeana, open source organizations, the National Light Stories, which is a small organization from the British Library. We looked at organizations that were independent legal entities and also talked to ones that were not, but were kind of embedded within a host organization. In fact, at that point, Europeana had not yet created the Europeana Foundation, and it was a kind of in that model of being hosted by the KB, not an independent organization, so right. So we looked at a bunch of those different models, and maybe I'll just, so the unit hosted in a member organization, I've seen that work successfully, but it's hard to do an international organization that way. And we thought it would be hard to also retain balance between the voices of the different parties that would be involved. We considered a charitable organization, a 501(c) in the US or registered charity in the UK. And we decided that they're quite strong auditing requirements, and it's basically a lot of paperwork you have to do in addition if you're going to be a real charitable organization. We didn't think that that additional work would have paid out in terms of increasing the membership or the overall revenue or sustainability of the organization. We considered the stichting model in the Netherlands. We also considered an association, so the eingetragene Verein approach in Germany. They have slightly different legal properties. We ended up viable, actually, and in fact, I've been involved in setting up another organization called DataSite that is a registered association under German law rather than a corporation under UK law.
Yep.
Sorry, am I still here? Yeah, okay. My screen went blank for a moment. We ended up settling on a corporation limited by guarantee under UK law. And with a slight variation of it, we set it up as a not-for-profit organization, which has some additional restrictions in the way you have the articles of corporation. I'm sure we'd be glad to share those with folks if that's a route that you end up going in business. So we settled on a model, right, not-for-profit corporation and a location in the UK. Then we had to figure out sort of how to get it up and running before the project closed. And the thing I guess I'll highlight is it's a lot of work, right? Some of you, I'm sure, have done this before, but it's actually quite a lot of work. So, we had to agree the details of the structure. Interesting discussion. If someone's interested, we can talk about the distinction between a kind of CEO model where staff is directly employed by the organization versus a kind of manager model where there's a strong association board that then hires a manager that kind of works through it. You get benefits both ways. We decided to have there are decisions about how you constitute the board. So one approach is effectively the members of organizations in the board are direct representatives of the organizations. With the OPF, we didn't take that route. Instead, we have a board of individuals who are elected by the members. The reason for that was to allow us to bring in experts, a business expert, for instance, that wasn't at one of the member institutions, or perhaps if a valuable board member left an organization or retired, we'd still be able to retain them on the board. There are a bunch of quite good things about having them in that role. The other thing is board members are there as individuals. They're not representatives of their organizations, right? I expect them to articulate the needs of the organizations, but they're there as board members to promote, support, and provide that advice to the organization, not the representative. We also had to obtain for legal advice and agree the articles. We went through many iterations of these things. It took quite a while, even though we were very close from the start. Getting the final agreement was quite challenging. We had to get commitments up front from organizations to defray the first-year costs and ensure that there's early revenue to pay the salaries of the staff. We can't pay them typically out of project budgets. They've got to be paid for the revenue of the organization itself. We had to agree that initial vision and objectives, which I highlighted. The mission stayed quite stable, so that's about meeting the preservation primarily and its members, supporting that project outputs and that transition from project to product. Excuse me, I've got something popping up here that I must close. And stimulating and engaging the preservation technical and practitioner community. We also had to agree the initial business model. So there's a lot of decision points in there, even in kind of straightforward membership supported organizations. So one of the questions that we dealt with was, membership pricing. How does that work? We ended up with a two-tier model with full members and affiliated members. full members are ones that are larger and own content. Affiliated members, so they're if you know this English metaphor of the chicken and the pig in the relationship to breakfast. Chickens are interested, but pigs are committed, right? So the full members are the pigs of the organization, right? They're the ones that have content, they've got a real problem and need solutions. Affiliated members tend to be ones that are research organizations, interested in providing services, interested in deeper understanding of the problem, and typically less full owners of it. That's not quite guaranteed for all purposes, but that's sort of what was the original thought there. The membership supports core staff through membership fees. There's a 1-year fee and a discounted 3-year fee. That was introduced a little bit after we got started and was actually quite a good idea. The Digital Preservation Coalition, DPC, also has that model, discounted 3-year membership to give an additional sense of longer-term stability and commitment. In addition to the membership, we've got some project revenue. So this is another sort of interesting discussion point. So I've, in my lifetime, seen quite a lot of small businesses who lived off of project funding. Okay, and one of my observations about those organizations in general, someone's scribbling. Am I going too long? One of my observations is that they tend to work for the people who pay them. And so they tend to be organizations that are very good at getting project funding, whereas we wanted an organization that would help us to solve our digital preservation problems. And so we wanted to make sure that we kept in balance that relationship between funding sources. So we going in notion of probably not more than 25% of organizational funding coming from projects. We've been reviewing the membership model more recently, and in order to support certain types of expansion, I think we have been considering within the OPF to consider a sort of a sliding scale, a transparent sliding scale for membership. That will take some of the edge off of content holders that are less capitalized. But I think for getting the organization started, actually going for a small number of large members who are well capitalized works out quite well, because members need care and feeding, and you need staff to care for them and feed them, and more of them requires more staff. Another challenge in the transition was making sure.
Adam, you have a few more minutes to go through. Will that work?
Yep. Yeah, I'll probably 3 more minutes or so. Making sure that transition, right, of knowledge, information, and resources happened from the project into the new organization. That was actually logistically that was quite challenging. And there's some legal difficulties, challenges in that as well. And we also had to hire staff with that commitment of when you're hired, there'll be an organization, but there's not one yet, which is also quite challenging. So that's kind of what we did. I think it's been working pretty well so far, reflecting a little bit on a couple of the lessons that we learned. Okay, so one is, I say it's hard work. So that means it's not just strategy, it's not just agreeing to mission, but there's a lot of logistical stuff, right? So that's getting in place a staff handbook, accounting, pensions, all that stuff has to be done for that small organization. Many of you will know that, but it's different than setting up a new unit in a large organization that already has these things in place. We ended up outsourcing many of those, and there are good services for outsourcing those activities for not-for-profits and small businesses today. I think the very strong relationships that we built up within the project work were absolutely essential. So we couldn't have gotten the agreement, the buy-in, or the commitment without those as a starting point for the organization. Then the challenge once we started is then opening up and bringing in more organizations, which we've done as well. Multi-year commitment was good. I think the business model and revenue mix was about right for that organization. And I noticed in some of, I've noticed, I think on a couple of slides, things like sustainable business model. So sustainability is earned. You can't predict it. You can hope for it. Sustainability is an observation you can make after the fact. We all hope these things will be sustainable. We've designed them so that there's a possibility that they will be. But I think the realism is, realistically, we're setting up small businesses, and small businesses can succeed and grow, and they can fail. And in fact, if we're setting up a restaurant business, we'd know we'd have about a 90% chance of failing within the first year. Right? We can do better than that because of the kind of commitment and support we can get. But I think one shouldn't underestimate that aspect of it. Another thing that a lesson learned and to highlight, not-for-profit is not the same thing as no margins. Can't cut it too close. The organization has to produce revenue in order to invest in new services. We took the step of setting aside a reserve for winding up the organization. It's actually a requirement. I think, and I just mentioned that because I'm not sure that everyone had thought about. It's not one of those things that you think about as you're setting it up, right? How you're going to close it down. But actually, it's an important thing to have in mind. Many of us in large organizations are used to being on project and program boards. Okay, it's a management tool, and being on the board of an organization is very different. Okay, and one of the things that we sometimes have to remind ourselves of, I think, is that our role is slightly different. We're not doing day-to-day management. We're taking a kind of different sort of responsibility for the activities of the organization and have a different kind of relationship to the CEO if we take that model. So I think that's something that I have to remind myself of now and then. And I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Maybe two last thoughts. I think that this kind of, for OPF, the technical and practitioner community is really gelling. And I think that the innovation community at large is really benefiting from it. So I think the impact that particular organization is having shows well, but that organization is shown to have a really nice and positive impact on the practice of digital preservation and the development of solutions. And the last thing I'd say is there's a big switch that happens at some point where you go from receiving money for being engaged in an activity, like a project, to paying money for services. And that's the little bit that's tricky when setting up these sort of organizations, is making sure that you can make that transition from your partners getting cash out of being there to one in which they're paying a contribution and getting the value back greater than the...
Thank you so much. That is really feet to the ground work, as we would call it, and very useful to get some of these day-to-day experiences from you. Before I hand over for questions from the floor, I had a very factual question. Perhaps I missed it. How many members do you have? How many staff do you have?
Okay, so the OPF has sort of 3 core staff and a couple of project supported staff. Okay, so the total number of people involved day to day, more or less full time, is, let me just count. Right. Count. 4. So small membership supported.
And member?
Members, I should look on the website, or I will get this number wrong, which I'd hate to do, and I'll let. So the number's roughly 20, but I have to check the website to get the right count, and then there's a breakdown between full and employee members. And so.
Yeah. That gives some sense of the magnitude with which you're working. Are there any? Sorry, Veronica, you asked how many? Around 20 members and around 4 staff full-time equivalent, 3, 4, and more people involved in projects. That's how I heard it. Are there more questions from the floor? Who has a question for Adam on how Open Planets Foundation is doing their stuff?
This is Wouter. May I? Yeah. Okay. I have 2 questions, but probably it will be also answered on later presentations. But the presenters can take care of that in that case. I was wondering what is different from an organized network. But in your last comment, you said that you want to earn money for services. So you apparently need a legal entity to manage the money. That is one question. And the second question, what are the restrictions for membership? How do you assess it? Do people have to show some level of competence or something else before they can start to become a member?
So let's see. One is, let me just do them in the reverse order, and hopefully I'll remember both. So the second one was to vet members. So there's not a requirement for competence. We're quite happy to have members who want to engage to learn. Okay, and the member network is really effective in helping people come up to speed. I think we've seen several members in the last year that have joined for that kind of reason. The first question was something like, why a legal entity rather than some other model? So there are a couple of reasons for that. So one is that we did want it to be able to engage directly in project work. So be a member of a project rather than have a member be the project member and it's sort of indirectly bring along the network. Right? We thought that was quite useful. We also thought that the balance would be important. So it's not a department in the British Library. It's not a department in the KD, right? It's an independent entity, and it needs to grow and find its own place in the world. And the initial members, of course, wanted to succeed, but it's important for it to find its very own place in the world. I think that the association or network model is harder in both of those areas.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a couple of things?
Yes, who is that? Sorry.
Donald.
Yes, please.
Hi, Adam. I wondered what the sort of breakdown was between membership turnover in terms of membership fees and project funding, and also whether you had any problems with partners being comfortable. I mean, for example, the tension between potentially a British Library element within a project and an Open Planets Foundation element within a project. Sorry, I don't know if people can hear me.
Yes, I'm just making a note so that there's 3 questions there. One was about project versus membership revenue.
Yeah.
One was about, if you will, competition either between members or between members and the organization. And the third one was?
Well, those are the two I thought I'd ask, but
I thought there was a third in there as well. Okay, so project versus membership. I think the project revenue is about 25%. And membership. Oh, the other was about turnover. Okay, so so the project, so the membership revenue is about 75%. The turnover has been very low. Not sure. I'd have to double check. We might have had someone leave, but it's been very low turnover. And the competition, that can be a problem with respect to project work. It hasn't been, I think, yet. So any OPF members on the call can correct me if I'm wrong about this. But so why isn't it? So one is you need to have a fairly reasonable level of. So there, I'm thinking about that. It's been a little bit. We've actually learned some lessons there. So it's really important to have a high level of transparency in order to stave that off. And I think that we've learned a little bit about how to increase the level of transparency there. Typically, the roles will be a little bit different. So the OPF will bring in a lead. Basically, we'll bring a couple of competencies to projects. So it will bring a competency around engagement. It will bring a competency around maturing technical solutions. It brings a competency around providing sustainability going forward, and maybe a bit around dissemination. And most of the members will bring slightly different core competencies. So there's quite a possibility for both the OPF and a member to be in a project together. So an example there is the state project, where both the OPF and the British Library, as well as several other OPF members, are project members as well. And the OPF is taking on a role there around dissemination, engagement, and sustainability, which is extremely useful for both the project and the OPF members that are also members of that project consortium.
If I can add something there, because I am the KB, well, I am on board of OPF, and the KB runs the Take Up sub-project in SCAPE, where we also work with OPF. And we've noticed that it has been extremely useful to have the OPF exactly around this, the dissemination, for instance. But we have also noticed, and we've also seen that in APARSEN already with the discussions with the European Commission around the website of the Alliance and the website of the APARSEN, or the presentation of APARSEN. Also there, it has been where we said, well, we might as well use the OPF to communicate everything at the project, because it's such a wonderful community already, and we can just discuss everything there. The Commissioner said, no, we really want you to profile the SCAPE project as a separate project as well, which is wise, of course, because there's other people involved as well. So that is an interesting thing. But I have noticed that the problem of being involved in these expertise centers and being a partner in project has for me not been so much as the competition in acquiring these projects. That has not been the problem at all, but the resources tend to overlap. I mean, the people involved working for such an organization as OPF will also work for the BL or for the National Library of the Netherlands, and you will need these people in. You will want 24 hours of their time at some point. I mean, that is sometimes more the issue. Very good people for projects are just hard to get. So that's another angle on the competition part.
Yeah. Thank you, Hilde-Lee. Would you like to say something on that, Adam? After that, I'm closing your bit. We're borrowing time now from the discussion session. I knew that if Adam would come first, it would spark a lot of discussion, so that's good. We can do that now instead of at the end of the session. So final word for Adam, and then we move on actually to you, Hilde-Lee. So Adam, go ahead.
Okay, so I think I'm happy to stop there. So thanks very much. So I hope that was interesting. I'm really sorry that I will have to go on to another meeting. That was just the compromise that I was able to make today. So I'll try to catch up with one another of you afterwards. Enjoy the rest of the webinar. And it took a little bit of work to get this set up, but once it's set up, it actually, for me at least, it worked very well. So I'm able to see a few of you and heard you well. I hope you were able to hear me in addition. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much, Adam, especially given your busy agenda. We appreciate it even more that you could spare this time. So I hope you'll be part of the discussions later on and throughout
Absolutely. And,
the rest of the project.
you know, I'd be glad to, to be engaged where I can in this activity, because getting the VCOE in a model that works and meets the community needs is something that we're interested in as well.
Okay, thank you so much. And then now we can move on to Hilde-Lee, but for that, I guess I hand over to Simon first. And when the slides are on, then Hilde-Lee, you can take your turn. Okay, I'm turning off mine. This is for Simon and Hilde-Lee.
Yeah, so just bring up the
Okay. Can you all hear me? I hope that everyone can hear me. Well, I'll... Okay, good. So I'm Hilde-Lee Spalk, and I'm in charge of research projects in the National Library of the Netherlands. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about the sort of overview of centers of competence that I've made, and some recommendations from the impact projects for APARSEN. And well, I'll start right away. Please, the next one. Okay, first some background and overview of centers in the digital library domain, then some common characteristics I found and some first observations, and then what APARSEN can learn from impact. Next, please. Okay, so what's the background of all this setting up of centers of competence and excellence? We know that OPF in the Planets project in the Framework 6 program did set up a sustainable organization after project ending of their own accord. We just stuck our heads together and said we must try and sustain what we have here. And we were very much stimulated, I must say, by the European Commission, but there was no obligation. This was different in F7, in the 7th framework. All of the projects funded there had the obligation to build something sustainable after project ending, and something was generally a center of competence or a virtual center of excellence. And I know that there is another form, a slightly different, or virtual network of excellence, I think. So it's all there, but it basically comes to this: you have your project, and when it's finished, you must find the means to set up an organization that will sustain itself. Now, the idea behind this was, of course, formulated in the I-2010 vision, but it has been taken onwards in the digital agenda and in Horizon 2020, and it will play a role in future funding as well. In the whole research infrastructure, there will be an important role for centers of competence, not only in the digital library area, but, well, as we're now in the digital library field, APARSEN is currently one of 6 that are being formed or are already there, and collaboration between these is advocated by the European Commission. Those involved in the other centers who are also in this call are aware that we have been invited to Luxembourg at some point as representatives of all these centers of competence to talk about what we can learn, how we can work together, and this is still very much stimulated by the EC. And I have done a little bit of gathering of information on centers. This was for APARSEN, but also for the European Commission to, at some point, I intend to write a sort of white paper for them so that we can put in some lines in future work programs for funding for our centers of competence. So it will be very good to go and talking to each other like this. There is, of course, obvious benefit in sharing of resources, offering services in a uniform and transparent way that all of the centers can benefit from. And we can also then probably have more access to funding. Okay, so I'm compiling this report. I just told you. Well, please next. So why should we share information? Well, to support and to indicate areas of potential collaboration. So what can we share? Basic information. I've all put this all in a document already, but I'm still waiting for some input before I push it from some people. And some basic information, but what is the most interesting is how do we keep our center alive? Business model, that sort of thing, customers, success factors. And I have a blog where I intend to share all of this with you, and I hope also to add a link to when this webinar is published, I can publish it there as well. Next, please. Okay, here's an overview of the centers. There's the Open Planets Foundation. Well, we just heard Adam talk about that. There's Presto Center. That came from the Presto Prime project, probably familiar to you. It's a foundation for the audiovisual digitization and digital preservation. Then there's Impact Center of Competence in Digitization for the digitization of historical printed text and providing tools and services for that. There is the 3D CoForm Virtual Competence Center that David Arnold will talk about later. I'm really happy that he was able to join for the capture and design of 3D objects. And there's VMUSNet, the Virtual Museum Transnational Network. And I'm really sorry that Daniel was not able to join because he has really interesting things to say about how they sustain already their center. And then, of course, APARSEN that's hosting this webinar now. Next, please. Common characteristics are, of course, they're all not-for-profit. Adam spoke of little businesses. They are in a way in that they have to sustain themselves, that they cannot be sure of funding, sort of continuous funding. But I have met none so far in this domain that have chosen the real small enterprise or real consultancy model. And I think that there may be a good reason for that. We may come back to that later, why it is maybe best not to go all the way in becoming a little company. The income mostly is a mix of membership, paid services and funding for projects. And the organization tends to be a small core facility. And I've noticed that most of us centers have a sort of direct business developer role. We always have a technical role, very important, and an admin role who is often also the webmaster and does the dissemination of the center. There's always a website as the main hub, and there is an office, but it is not necessarily an office that you can visit. There is some back end, some organization takes on the responsibility of being the address, but that is not a very important thing. And there's always, in those successful that have sustained themselves now after Project Ending, a very strong buy-in from the original consortium. Next, please. Now, the opportunities for revenue, for the revenue, paid services, paid sponsorship, it's really dependent on the field. I've noticed that digitization offers more opportunities for sponsorship, etc., than digital preservation, for instance. Digital preservation, so far, it's very difficult for companies also to find a good business model for offering things there. Relatively little money is spent on digital preservation in content holding organizations. It becomes more and more, but there is not usually spent on one big service or something. So this is different to digitalization, where most of the libraries who digitize their collections, for instance, will outsource this to huge providers. They will be the millions we need per month or per week even to really digitize all our material. And there's serious money in that. That means that there's serious interest from providers to sponsor and become members of that center. They really like to get involved with these content holders. It's really interesting for them. And I've noticed a couple of approaches. I saw that WeMustNet, for instance, is very enterprising as a project already. They initiate new projects and gain revenues from that. That's very interesting because they have an expertise to offer that's not there in the museum world. Well, that's a whole new, another approach. I've seen that, I think, probably Impact has been most active in engaging commercial partners. As I told you, it's pretty, well, already while we were a project, we had to fend them off. So that was a good way of getting revenue there. And the OPF has a very strong community in the digital preservation field. I think at the moment OPF is probably the strongest community of all these centers that we now see. There's a lot of talk going on. There's a lot of activity on the forum, on the website. There's a lot of engagement around hackathons and stuff. Yeah, I've noticed that. And I've seen that the 3D CodeForm Virtual Center has a strong emphasis on the practical deployment that encourages membership. But I'm sure that David Arnold about that more later. Okay, next, please. So that was the sort of first observations from doing a sort of quick scan of the whole field. Now, to come to my own center of competence or my own project, the Impact was run by the National Library of the Netherlands. It was funded to develop tools and resources to improve digitization, and we improved mainly OCR. So that's optical character recognition for all text, and we did a lot of language technology, image science, that sort of thing. And the very beautiful thing of this was that we brought together the libraries, the scientists, the computer scientists, image scientists, and the language technology people and industry partners. That's really important that you have these three groups working together. We have not found a separate legal entity yet. As Adam said, for us also it was a lot of work finding a way forward there, but for now we are part of the non-profit foundation of the hosting organization. That is the Biblioteca Virtual de Cervantes in Alicante and Madrid. And we are currently hosted as an activity of that center, but by the end of this year we'll decide with the board on a separate legal entity. And we are thinking of a Dutch stichting, for instance, which is a very nice form. And you can use it also for things that are not necessarily in the Netherlands, as long as you have one partner there. Okay, the governance is done by a board of premium. That is members who pay a large fee of 10,000 euros for the commercial partners and 6,000 for public partners. And then we have, so currently we have a board of like 9 or 10 people, premium members, and then we have around 40, but counting. We are currently having a real rise in membership as the project has only just finished, and now we've really been pushing this center. And of standard members, and they pay 600 euros and for a public institution and 1,000 for a very small company. Management is again 3 people, a manager, a developer, and in that office, a manager, developer, and a sort of project manager person. And business development is distributed. That a lot of it is done by the board members. I think that is a very good idea to engage, to have board members who are so very passionate about the project and the results, and also who have been instrumental in setting up this center. They really want to sell this center to other people still. So you must use them. They are still based in their original organization. They have their network. And these are the people that they travel around. These are the people you must engage in making noise about your center. And they will not charge you any extra for it. They love it. So I think that is something you must never underestimate, how you can use your own board members or members in general. Also, the rest, some other stuff is distributed. For instance, the offices are in Spain, but the websites and all the tools are hosted in the Supercomputing Center in Poznan, who was also a partner in the project, who is now also a premium member. And for instance, the KB, who is a member, a premium member of the center, also offers a technical person one day a week to help with the center. And all the other partners in the project are available for delivering expertise if needed. Next, please. So how do we stay alive? We have a business model that is a combination of membership and pay as you go. We have identified 3 customer segments. There's content holders, the libraries, archives, museums who have difficult content. They want tools and advice to this and to improve the access to the difficult historical text. Then there's another group, the research institutes in the fields of document imaging, OCR, language technology, processing of noisy text. They need real-life data sets to work on. These guys, we worked with image scientists, and they would go to ICDAR, their big conference, and they would, I've been to these conferences too, they would always talk about this one data set, I forget the name of it, and it consisted actually of like 5 or 10 old pages. But we have a data set of 1 million pages with ground truth for 500,000 pages, which is very good to do testing on, to develop stuff on. It's an invaluable resource. And they also loved working with the real users because they want to solve real life problems. And then there's the service providers who make software and integrate services, and they are very interested in getting access to the content holders. They're also interested in standardization. They're interested in quality assurance. And these 3 groups meet each other, and they benefit from each other. Now, revenues come from the membership, as I indicated already, it should be 600 to 10,000, from fees for services like consultation services, digitization help, a little revenue on the software if we are a mediator between someone who is going to use a certain tool and we bring them into contact, there will be a little revenue for the center. And project funding. We have been very successful already in getting funding for a lot of activities that we planned for the next 2 years. We are currently signing the grant agreements for that, and that will start in January, and it will take immediately a lot of the load of our shoulders of having, because we all together, the founding members, took the risk of paying for these people who are working in now, and it will take a little bit of our risk away. It will make it possible to contemplate a little bit more on how we want to go about this, etc. And well, it's very blissful that we have got this money, of course. Okay, so we now have 9 premium members, and we have the 40 standard and counting, I think. Next, please. So this is how we built our business model. We did this with the whole project. We used the business model generation .com method of Alex Osterwalder, where you have the 9 building blocks, and you use that to do a sort of brainstorm with a lot of people involved. We had groups of people, different groups from the project, over a period of 3 years in the project. We got together at several occasions and did this. We filled out this form. We started on the right-hand side, which is the hard side, the people side. So that is where the value is, the relationships, the customers. And then we did the left hand, the brain side, where we said, okay, so what will it cost? What will we need? And then, of course, we matched the cost structure to the revenue streams, and we came up with the model that I just sketched, which is not so different from other centers. And why did we do it like this? Next, please. Oh yeah, this is an example of one of these sessions. You would all go and write on these little yellow papers. Well, I'm sure you've been to sessions, brainstorming sessions in your life before, but this was always very fruitful. A lot of good ideas came out of this. Next, please. Okay, this is the spread of the consortium, and they were all involved in it, every one of them, in building the model. Next. Yes, it was about gathering ideas. Yeah, you have to click a couple of times. Then this is where we gathered the ideas. Yes. And it was also about finding commitment. And that was probably as important. If you involve everyone in this, everyone becomes an owner of the idea. And for instance, if you look at the right-hand picture, there is a lady in it who is, well, she has now left our library, but she was someone in our marketing department who would eventually have to have a big say in deciding whether the KB would be part of the center. And I just had her accompany me to a meeting in Prague, I think it was. And she got involved and she got enthused, and she told it, of course, in the board of our library. She talked about this, and I think we often involve higher executive directors, that sort of people, in building the business model, and it has been very beneficial because then in the end everyone wants to be a part of this. Next, please. Yeah, this is how these brainstorming canvases, I should call them, they're canvases, they end up with a lot of, we used to consolidate all the ideas in PDFs like and send it back, and then we'd work on it again. And we still keep them, and I occasionally look at them because they're still full of ideas. And this is only one version because this is the one for content holders, and we had one for research partners and for service providers. So we had 3 complementary business models that we now handle. Next, please. So success factors were a very strong voice in the commitment of the original Impact Consortium. Well, as I said, we had this continuous engagement. Then the partners most involved in building center, we all had a good network, and we tapped it to extend the center. Already in founding members of the center, there are 2 or 3, let me have a look, 2 or 3 members who were not in the project itself, but who were keen to join as soon as the possibility was there. So that's 2 premium members of the 9 are outside the project, and they came from our network that we already had. We have a distributed organization and shared costs, which makes the risk, of course, much lower. We have this business model with the 3 customer segments, and we had enormous support of the EC. At some point, we saw that we were going to have some money left over in the Impact project, and we asked for an extension, and it was granted, well, immediately. They loved the idea that we would do that, and that made it easy. So the first half year of 2012, the center could still be supported more or less from the project. And now only in this second half of 2012, we have to run it on our own without funding, but it made the start much easier. And also there was a lot of advice and encouragement and endorsements from the side of the EC. It's very wise. We involved them in brainstorming sessions as well. And I remember we did that in Planets as well, and it has also been very beneficial. It's always good to involve them. Next, please. And in sustaining, I think there's still the keenness to test and use the tools. There's also other tools that do not come from Impact. There's a lot of people wanting to showcase their tools in our Center of Competence. And that's the other area where researchers and companies want to join and showcase the tools that they have and test it against our evaluation software, for instance. We have a very good interoperability, and that is making digitization better, cheaper, and faster. And we do not want to compete with companies in Europe at all. We want to help them rather. So we have been successful already in obtaining project funding. I think that is really important. We keep the costs as low as possible, and we have an ongoing enthusiasm with of partners. And I think next will be my last slide, I hope, really. No, that's challenges. Oh yes, of course. So challenges are responding to the expectations, because as you know, as you see, I give a passionate story about this, and this raises expectations, and then people come and say, oh, is this all? They may. I mean, we may not be able yet to meet all the expectations. The integration of tools and services in the website has been a pain. A lot of it has been achieved by now, but everything is always more difficult than you think. Supporting the implementation of tools in content holding, because the tools are not mature. That is one part of the story, but the other is that these organizations are often not ready for those innovations that they have asked for themselves. But that is a really organizational thing. And in this project that we have got funding for, I hope that we can address that issue also, really evangelize a little bit and give support. To keep innovation alive, that's really also part of our mission. Not only implement what is there, but also stimulate the innovation. And that's why we're going to organize contests and around data sets and seeing what's the best segmentation, what's the best UI, that sort of thing. And of course, to continue to identify and attract new members, customers, stakeholders. Next, please. Okay, so for APARSEN, it's very important to see where you are in the field, of course. What is your place? What can you do? What can you add? What do people really need? What is the value that you can provide to define a sustainable business model? Maybe in APARSEN we can also do sessions like we had in Impact with the Canvas, etc. But most of all, I think key is that you have trust and build it and mutual sympathy in the consortium. That's really important. All these, I know from Planets, I know from Impact, at least from these two projects that have flowered or blossomed into centers of competence now, that we love to work with each other. We all thought, oh, isn't it great that a library can work with that researcher, and we want to continue that. We had a good relationship, and it was a gold mine, and it still is. So, and it was also on a personal level. There was a lot of trust and mutual sympathy in the consortium. And I think that is a very important thing to foster and build as part of your building your business model. It's a bit of a soft thing, but I think it is key. And of course, mutual respect is part of that. Okay, I hope these were my slides.
Thank you,
Sorry if I took very long.
Quite nicely in time, only a few minutes over. Thanks a lot. This is a very interesting and very comprehensive view with many aspects playing a role. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Who has a question for Hildelie? It appears you've been extremely clear, I guess. So,
well, it's that. I hope people haven't fallen asleep.
I'm pretty sure of that. And yeah, I really don't hear anybody else, so I think we can move on. And David Arnold has moved to a different room and a better Wi-Fi environment. Thank you very much for that, David. And we heard you speak, so
Hello?
Sound works now.
It does seem to.
Yeah. We haven't seen your picture yet, but we'll take that for granted. We'll look it up on the web.
It's plugged in, and I have given permission, but there's only 6 tiles showing, so I assume there are other people who are not showing.
Well, usually you would appear in this row of pictures. Feel free to do it, otherwise let's not bother too much.
Turn it on if it's not already there, because it was there when I had it plugged in, and it still is.
Okay, it might take bandwidth again. So let's not be too fuzzy about that. And okay. I thought that Simon had your slides. Is that correct, Simon?
Yes, that's right. Do my usual thing then.
Okay, then I will hand over to Simon and to David. Up to you.
On a moment. Right, you should be able to see the slides now.
I made this up big text on black background. I thought it was can you see it? I thought it was worth just having something to introduce the project itself, 3D Coform project, from which the VCC 3D has come. Our remit, and I think this reflects a bit the fact that 3D as a medium is considerably behind some of the other cultural content that has been the subject of these sorts of projects. Comparing what we do in 3D with the state of digitization and of use of materials online through text and AV, for example, both of which have very strong presence in digital media. The presence of 3D is rather less so, both within the cultural organizations in digital format and also within the general public. So 3D TV is taking off. 3D films have been around since the 50s, but have only recently had a resurge of new technologies and so on. I think that puts us in a slightly different position from some of the other areas of competence centres. So both the acquisition of 3D digitization and the uses and long-term storage and all the other aspects of a digital pipeline are less established than I would argue, and hence we would have further to go to embed within a quotes a marketplace or a sector, because the sector is not yet experienced in even thinking about these things. Our remit was, these came from our project officer at the startup, to improve the tools for 3D documentations of heritage, to link those representations to metadata, to information on collections, and to provenance data and so on, and then to take it through to communicating and experiencing heritage. We've always been targeted with linking through to Europeana, and that is starting. And then we get onto the other areas of sort of legacy, the establishment of the Virtual Centre of Competence for 3D, which was written in as a deliverable in the original project. Deployment and evaluation of tools, including socioeconomic impact, that was an area of activity both for research in terms of developing the tools for doing and it needs the buy-in of the organisations that the partners work for in order to get that that time allocated. Working in a university in the UK, it seems to be pretty typical that working weeks are not confined to European norms or even to our contracts, which say 37 hours a week. I'm sure many people will see similar parallels where they work in a research organisation. The time that is well above any normal paid-for working hours, individuals have a little bit of control over. We actually have a scheme within the university that allows a formal amount of volunteer time within your working space, in other words, within your contract hours. I don't think we'd be touching that in the way that we work. On the other hand, the time that we give up beyond and above our contract hours is typically used to support research and is typically used to support collaborations outside the university, which will lead to publications or grants or other activities that then get reported within the university. We envisage providing membership services, that is the entitlement to something because you're a member, and other services which would be charged for, which are beyond the basic entitlement. We have not yet established a paying membership scale or a membership that is paying it, although that's high on our agenda given when our project funding finishes. We do believe the market is the sector is considerably more fragmented in 3D than perhaps in some of the other large institutional areas. There's a fraction of museums and so on that are large institutions or archaeological sites, but they don't tend to be organizations that have large subscriptions associated with them. So they don't tend to be organizations that have, for example, an expectation of subscribing to journals at great charges and so on. And the sector itself seems to be fairly unfamiliar with the concept of paying membership fees. So we are pretty sensitive to the sensitivity of the sector in terms of the rates that we might charge for a membership, and that seems to be one of the biggest challenges in going forward. We are entitled as a legal entity to seek grants and other funding. We're currently looking at a couple of startup grants which would be allowed for a small company in the UK, targeting the cultural heritage area sector, and it's possible that we might get some startup funds that way. We have so far singularly been unsuccessful in getting any support from the European Commission other than within the project, and that, in fact, one of the interesting things from what Hildelie said was the idea of using extension funding from the basic project. We're currently not anticipating having funds left at the end of the funding period, but earlier on in the project we did approach the Commission about whether or not we could use project funds to effectively for partners to take out a subscription for their membership of the VCC 3D to help with the initial startup period, and we were refused permission for partners to do that. They said it would not be an eligible cost. So that's an interesting variation on being able to take funds from the project to support the competence centre, in that we were denied that as an option. I haven't investigated going for the extension, but I don't think we're going to have any funds left to do that. We're using a virtual office facility, which is a purely online facility. It doesn't have a physical presence, but it offers all the services that an office would have. Adam was talking about the needs for a staffing handbook and various other things, because the OPF would have the Open Plans Foundation would have a staff associated with it, and was not already an employer. At the moment, we're not an employer, and we are currently avoiding the possibility of being an employer by hiring in services rather than hiring in staff. That's going to be an interesting model to see if we can sustain it, but I suspect that very soon we'll need to have, when we have an income stream, we'll probably need to have employees rather than services. But in line with trying to keep costs down, we think it's better to start off with trying to hire in services. The company is currently dormant, otherwise it has not yet started trading, but quite a lot of activities are branded as the VCC 3D, including elements of the exhibition we've just run in Brighton and is now running in Italy, about the results. There are elements there that are branded as the VCC 3D to raise awareness of the concept and the planning, but it's not yet taking payments, so I don't have to do tax returns and all the other things that go with having a company quite yet. Next slide, please. There is a preliminary website, as with all of us. Next slide, please. So, challenges. One is that the VCC 3D is a separate legal entity. It's not a partner in 3D Co-Form or the consortium agreement. So rights that we want to be able to use the results of the project while formally tied up with the partners. And depending on the partners, you may have a variety of opinions about the degree to which they wish to share those freely, or what sort of licensing arrangements and what sort of commercial value they see within the products within the tools and sets and so on that they have developed. So there is an issue about the legacy IPR, which belongs to the partners who have developed the individual components. Now clearly it's all integrated as well, but there's defined interfaces, so up to an interface is clearly the IPR of individual partners. A second thing is the rights that are concerned with the consortium agreement only exist up to the end of the funded period of the project, and things that are developed beyond that, the rights are in fact new rights to new work. So there's a split between the underpinning IPR that goes out at the end of the project and new IPR that's developed as the tools continue to develop. Now, some of our partners are tied into the games industry or whatever, where bits of software developed for 3D and so on are likely to have particular value, and so it's the range of situations for individual partners is fairly broad. We have gone through an exercise of identifying which partners want shareholders. As I said earlier on, if we have big partners who are shareholders at the time that you go for a startup grant, then that reduces your likelihood of success in obtaining a startup grant, because they think the funding should come from the large shareholders. So at the moment we've delayed in terms of taking on formal shareholders, and the shares are currently vested in individuals from the project. But that gives a different set of things, because the individuals have no rights to the results of the project, and the partners who own the IPR also appoint directors and are likely to be shareholders. So there's an interesting balance of particular roles in legal in the legal framework of the VCC 3D. Now we're steering our way through that as I speak, and we've got various things happening which have got close to resolving that, but it's taken a lot longer than you might imagine to steer through that morass. Next slide. Next slide, please. Hello. So the other thing that people have commented on is the business about ramping up things. So trying to find the low-hanging fruit for exploitation to try and establish a presence out in the community distinct from the project. I think it's very noticeable that when Hildis was talking that the two projects that seem to be furthest down this line, well, the two that were the most recent ones that were on the list were in essence using project funding to establish the central competence. And it's quite an interesting legal situation in terms of if it's an independent legal entity, then and it's not a member of the consortium of the project, how does that take place? So I think there's some interesting challenges there. It's clearly easier to start it up as an activity rather than a legal entity within a project. Transitioning that into a legal entity which is distinct and has a life of its own after a project is definitely a challenge, and it's particularly a challenge, I have to say, when the Commission hasn't funded any of the applications we put in based around taking that forward. Establishing the member base, we have a list of hundreds of organisations that have shown interest and have responded to mailings and so on. Turning that contact list into a member base, we think probably the best way of going about that is to be able to offer initially a free or very low cost initial membership and fund the organisation at a low cost base through startup grants while we do the transition to demonstrating the worth of being a member. To do that, we need to further the defining of the sustainable membership rights, in other words, the things you get because you're a member. But even things like running a newsletter do take effort, and the question is, where does the effort come from, and where does the cost base, the income stream come from in order to fund that? The general expectation seems to be that partners will donate some time of people in order to do that activity. In the UK, things are more and more accounted for at a very incremental level, so that each new activity is expected to have costings and internal account codes and all this sort of thing, which makes that quite tricky unless we get into being able to use volunteer time in order to be able to generate effort to put into the VCC 3D. One potential area is that quite a number of the partners have people who have either recently retired or are approaching retirement age, and actually they may well come through to being able to take a different view of paid employment beyond their immediate career aspirations. So that may be actually quite a useful source of additional input, but it can't be the input that the whole organisation relies on. It has to be something which allows value added. So establishing a presence in the sector, this is taking time, I'm not surprised. But I think in all cases that I've heard today, and all the evidence I've seen, getting established as a competence centre is probably a 10-year rather than a 2-year operation. And as Adam was saying, in terms of a sustainable enterprise, rather than calling it a business, call it an enterprise, as a sustainable enterprise, it will be very fragile in that early period until there's an ongoing and defined user base and client set. I'd be interested to hear what others have to say about the basis on which partners are buying into providing advice. I've had every reaction from, yes, we'll sell you consultancy services and we have to add VAT and overheads and you find you're paying 150,000 euros per full-time equivalent person per year, through to people who say, yes, of course you can have advice, I'll give it for nothing, it will be impartial, and all those other things that go with that. And I think there's a real challenge depending on the sorts of organisations we're dealing with. And then there's balancing that impartiality with the payback if you're getting volunteer time from organisations. And what I was talking on earlier on about the whole business of project fundings, invested interest in acquiring new projects. The other thing I think is a challenge is the Commission's expectations of sustainable activities and slightly viewed towards the commercial end of operations. A lot of what we deal with in cultural heritage is about community interest, it's about not-for-profit motives, it's about all sorts of things which are to do with citizenship, and actually the paybacks for museums, the paybacks from museum activity are not normally resident in the accounts of the museum. They're usually resident in the accounts of the nearby hotels and other things that go with it. So the actual sort of expectation that there's a business sector here, as opposed to there's something for well-being, quality of life and other things, is quite an interesting challenge, I think. Next slide, please. I think that's about it, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. And of course, any questions?
Thank you very much, David. Before I hand over for the questions, I have a small, simple, similar factual question. How many launching methods do you expect?
Launching methods, did you say?
Sorry, members, I said.
Launching
so
members
of whom you...
From the consortium itself. We're looking at the moment around 10 of the 19.
Okay. Questions for the floor? Who has a question about this? For David.
David, I was just wondering, I'm not entirely sure, is 3D Coform a research project or is it also a network of excellence?
It's a research project. It's a large-scale integrating research project.
Okay, and have you considered, there is still in this, the 10th call of FP7, there is a horizontal action where you can extend your consortium with partners from the new European countries. And there might be money there. And you might also be able to, well, you have to look into the conditions in the current work program. It's just it's just we did this in Impact, not for the Center of Competence, but we did this halfway, and then having no money to build the Center of Competence, we used that extension halfway the project to also make a work package for the Center of Competence and give that some money. And that was money that was left over at the end for a bit, and that we could use in that second extension. So we actually used the funding instruments that were there. It's just a tip. Keep scanning the work program.
Absolutely, and I'm fully aware of the number of different options there are for finding things. We put in around 6 or 7 different ways of approaching adding on related activities which would have allowed some extension work, and none of them was successful. So
I'm really sorry to hear that.
We came to the conclusion that the Commission didn't really want work in this area, but that was a different reason. That was a low moment when I was feeling a bit depressed, and now I'm sure they do want it. But one of the things I do think that's an underpinning thing for all of us, and actually worth thinking about as a group of centres of expertise and excellence going into having that discussion with the Commission, and that's how many people are aware of the sort of Fraunhofer model of funding institutes, where they draw, I think, 1/3 of their funding from government, 1/3 from projects, and 1/3 from selling services. And everybody I know in the Fraunhofer says that 1/3 from government makes all the difference in terms of guaranteeing a presence over a period of time that allows ongoing work in both the projects and services to be done in a way that stimulates other things. And it just seems to me that we ought to be saying to the Commission at some point that the set of competence centres needs a low level of background funding in order to make sure that some of the other things can be built on top with a degree of confidence. if the whole organisation is fragile, it seems to me that we're asking for trouble over a period of time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If I may, Eefke, react to that directly. Then, as you know, I announced it also last time, but that when we applied for this funding in this project that now supports the Impact Center of Competence, we also asked a little bit of funding for engaging with the other centers of competence. So that is you and you and you and you. I mean, that is the ones I mentioned in my slides, to get together and talk about setting up just such a sort of network of centers of competence. So I think, and I like your idea about the Fraunhofer model. I think that's a very interesting idea that could go into that. And so it will probably be well, either the APARSEN project that's still running and has money for this, or the Succeed project that will get representatives of all these together to talk about that cooperation. So there is this opportunity, and
what I think we need is something that is actually not a project in one area that supports getting together, because then everybody who's getting together who isn't in that project has to be finding funding to support the ongoing.
Actually asked funding for that, for getting people together. So there should be some money for traveling and stuff. Yeah.
It's not the getting together that's the problem. It's the background activity within each of the competence centres. And I think it's a challenge for the Commission to even think about that, because it smacks of pre-deciding the results of a bid.
But this, I'm not entirely sure I understand.
Well, if we were to say to the Commission, we need some funding. You've invested in these areas. We have a presence. We have things to offer. But unless there's a background level of activity, these things are unlikely to survive. They can carry on going for project by project by project, but actually you will not get a consistent message coming out unless there is something that says the competence centres in their own right are worth doing. And the moment what happens is that you get some money to do something else and you justify some of that money being spent on a competence centre. But actually, if they want a series of things about competence centres, then at some point they have to bite the bullet and say, this is infrastructural, it's not project-based.
Well, the idea is that we would write some input for the next funding for competence centers altogether. I think that is the idea. And, well, I just think we should all get our heads together.
When were you thinking about calling them?
Beg your pardon?
When were you thinking about calling such a meeting?
I would say next year, early next year. Would that be too late for you? Will you already have perished? No, you wouldn't, because you have a feasible center in many ways.
Ongoing activity. I could see the partners keeping it going until, for another year or so, but I can't see them doing it for an indefinite period of time.
Well, I think we should discuss this offline, because this is about organizing. So I think there may be other questions.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm taking a look at the time.
Maybe implicit the question. I've been involved on what you call a center of competence to develop something like for the European large-scale natural history museums. That has been STL this year. And maybe it's an interesting thing, if you want, so that I can send some of you some contact details to discuss it. But an important issue in relation to finance is what you finally want to do. It is either a corporation of members, then you pay it yourself, and you should not ask money from the Commission. Yeah, you can ask a project, but I think it's very weak if you ask for structural money for something that you do for your own community. Or it is something different, you're building a new resource infrastructure. But then you have to make the choice that you transplant part of the powers and the money from your organization to a new organization. There's a total reorganization. So I think that you have to know very careful what you're doing and what is your strategy in this regard. Thank you.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Very interesting.
Any of those is possible, but what we would wish to do is to make sure that the work and the expertise isn't lost. And actually, either of those models works fine for me. The community interest company is merely something that has come forward as a potential way of doing that. Looking around, it's not been obvious what legal mechanisms allow a consortium effectively to bid for project funds that doesn't have something like that sort of presence. You have to have a legal entity.
Okay.
So
These are all, yeah.
Sorry, I just want to ask Wouter. Were you talking of BHL?
Yeah.
BHL is common activity of the what we could call the Center of Competence in Europe, together with similar initiatives around the globe.
Yeah, but you were talking of that one, weren't you?
Talking about CTAF. CTAF is a consortium of European taxonomic facilities. That is a consortium institute, and they established now a new legal entity to operate on their behalf on common issues for training, expertise, and so on. And the discussion is there, should we take one further step to research infrastructure? But that would imply that you shift powers and money and people from the existing organization to a new organization that will be much larger. That was my issue, that is a strategic choice what you want to do.
I mean, I think there is an issue there because of the range of different. Sorry?
Yeah. We're running out of time. Yes, I'm sorry, we're running out of time. This only shows that all of us are at the start of a beginning, at the beginning of a discussion rather than ready for conclusions. And yet, because we only have 2 or 3 minutes left, I want to grant those few minutes to David Geretta, because David, perhaps you can give in only a few sentences your thoughts on what
thanks,
would be the
Ika.
best way for APARSEN to
Okay,
work on its own sustainability.
I think the briefest thing I could say is, speaking personally, there are two things. First is, I look at this completely the other way around. Okay, this is not APARSEN creating a virtual centre because it was required by the EU. I look at it, and this you've got to understand, and you can understand it by thinking about the name APARSEN. Alliance for Permanent Access to the Records of Science in Europe Network. So it came about as something which was part of the strategic plan of the APA, which began probably around 2005, where we took, as has been said, several years to set up as a legal entity. So it's been around since 2007, 2008. So that speaks well to Adam's sustainability is earned and David's 10-year activity. But the point is that there was a strategic plan to do research and then to move into infrastructure, because that was seen by the members who created the APA, which is what I'm talking about. APA is the Alliance for Permanent Access to the Records of Science in Europe. So the strategic plan was implemented over those years from 2005 in terms of a number of projects, CASPAR, which was from Luxembourg, PARS Insight, which was from Brussels, the e-infrastructure unit, APARSEN, which is from Luxembourg, and then CIDIP, which is from the e-infrastructures. And what I think you see now is very clearly the unit that funded CASPAR, Planets, APARSEN, that is now moving away from digital preservation, and the interest really is in e-infrastructures. So Wouter will remember, of course, things like riding the wave. There are things being set up in a global system like the Research Data Association, and I think all of these things are global, and we need to be looking beyond Europe, as I think we all are. So, I mean, I look at it, as I say, the other way around, that APARSEN is not something that, oh, we have APARSEN, and we're forced to create a network of a virtual centre of excellence. I look at it as being something which is in the grand plan, which I think has builds on something with a proven track record. It does sound as if all of the things which are talked about in terms of boards, I mean, all of Adam's points about the boards, the taking time, the pain of setting up the legal entity and so forth, funding from projects, funding from members, all of that is entirely consistent. And so I guess I'm relatively pleased from my own personal point of view when I hear all these things. One thing that does come to mind, and that is, which may not be a popular thing to say, and that is that it does seem to me sometimes that the EU, and I say this purely to provoke comment, that the EU is doing what it tends to do, namely provoke fragmentation. There are many things here that do with digital preservation, and what are they forcing us to do? Each project that's set up has to create a virtual centre. I mean, if you think about it from a strategic point of view, the only thing they can really hope for is to stimulate the blooming of these virtual centres, with full expectation that, as Adam says, 90% of them will fail. So I think that when we talk about these things, there are quite a few lessons we could learn from the business side, and I think we're all aiming at these things. But I used to say in EU meetings that what we have to do is fight the fragmentation that the funders impose on us, and it does seem to me that that's exactly what we need to do now. There are attempts with things like the Research Data Alliance, which is being set up, but we should get our heads together and think about what real sustainability is, because otherwise there's a danger that we'll end up with nothing. I mean, apart from maybe some very small niche centres with a small number of members, and that I mean, you could say that applies to the Alliance as well, but at least that has been around for a few years. So maybe if I've been sufficiently provocative, I hope that's what Yveske wanted me to be, then I'll stop.
Okay, well, certainly sufficiently provocative, and at a very clever moment, because we're closing the meeting now, so we cannot even continue that discussion. But I'm sure that this is, the upbeat to more discussions to follow on this point, because APARSEN is only halfway, or not even halfway. So we'll be organizing more on this topic, and at this moment, I want to ask everybody who has been contributing today, because this really gives a very, very useful overview of the horizon and indeed the many initiatives that are happening here and there. Some of them further along the road, others just starting. APARSEN still very much in the thinking process, but a lot of things happening. We're closing here. There will be a written report on our website of this meeting. It's also been recorded. Last time it was a bit difficult to process the recordings, but perhaps we're improving this time. So maybe you'll find even this complete meeting on the website. And the question of Ash, will the slides from today be made available online? That we will certainly do. So David and Hildelise, if you can, well, actually the slides are with Simon. So if you allow, then Simon can upload them immediately on the website or via Christina or David. And I'd say thanks to all of you for your time and the very good contributions to the
I hope I
discussion.
didn't
Thanks a lot.
talk out of turn there, Yvka.